Hey everyone, today is going to be part 3 in learning how to prepare for an interview, specifically for behavioral questions. Now this is really important to get right, as these can be looked at as curveballs thrown by the interviewer, talking about a difficult time when you completed a project, or maybe when you were client facing. Well, we're going to walk through really easy steps with an interview template on how to get prepared to answer those questions. My name is Ariel Herrera with the AnalyticsAriel channel, where we bridge the gap between real estate and technology. Now, even though this isn't real estate focused, it is imperative for you to try to become a high income earner in order to get approved for loans, as well as have more income to put towards properties. And if you haven't already, please subscribe to this channel, as well as like this content. All right, let's get started. Great, so right now I'm on Google Docs. I created a template called the interview template. It's basically what I've been doing throughout my career, but I actually finally documented it into one spot. And it's broken out into several sections, about 5 sections with a bonus. And the whole goal here is to get you prepared for every interview that you are going to have, especially ones that move on from just a recruiter talk, but all the way through to getting to final rounds where you might have multiple interviews in a row. So in previous videos, we talked about the STAR method, which ties in very well to behavioral questions, as well as your elevator pitch for saying how to answer, tell me about yourself. Now we're jumping into behavioral questions, which aren't actually as difficult to answer as you might expect. It's all just one single framework. So skipping down to here, I have a brief explanation of what behavioral questions are. This comes from the site The Muse, which we're going to go over. They're a really good resource for interviewing as well as just dealing in the workplace. So up front, some tips that I do have is when we start to create these examples of answering behavioral questions, you always want to make sure to be honest. And the reason why you want to make sure that your responses are very honest is because, say if I'm a developer and someone's asking me, do you know how to program in Java? And I say, yeah, of course, I've programmed in Java before, but I've only done it in maybe a Udemy course. So I've actually haven't applied it to the workforce. Well, now they might ask me more detailed questions about this programming language. And if I can't understand it, or answer those questions correctly, it's already going to be a red flag in the employer's eyes as to what am I also lying about on my resume. And also, we want to be very specific. So one of the most pitfalls that I've seen people have is, say if I am someone who works in a service industry and someone says, give me an example of when you dealt with a difficult customer. If I go into it saying, well, when it's a difficult customer, sometimes what I'll do is I might go to my manager to have them go over to the customer to settle them down. It just sounds the problem here is it just sounds so abstract. But now if I tell you, yes, there was one time, it was a Saturday night, so very busy in the summertime, as you can imagine. Everyone is trying to book reservations. And sometimes the system actually has issues where it may double book people. And then they get very frustrated because they expect to be sitting down at 8 p.m. and it's 8:15, they're still waiting for a table. So what I do is I try to bring a menu out early on, as well as let them know that I sympathize with them waiting. And you know the whole thing, not going to go into it. But you see, just putting an example just gives a little bit more color and it makes you pop as an interviewee. All right, so what is the actual template to answering these questions? So it's the same exact structure as STAR, which is great because we already covered that. So there's 4 parts. You want to talk about the situation, the task, the action, and the result. So just as a brief recap is, say if we were going back to this server example of dealing with a difficult customer, situation is the Saturday night very busy, and the issue is that we overbooked certain reservations. The task is that you need to control the situation because one of the customers is getting a little bit irate that they're still waiting, the action that I took is to sympathize and let them know that I understand them, try to help by bringing them the menu ahead of time so they can at least start to look at something, as well as maybe offer a 5% discount. And then the result was that they're very satisfied from me actually taking attention to their needs. And they not only had a great dinner, but they also came in the future and remembered me. So you see, it's just really easy to break it down into those 4 parts. So now let's skip over to what type of behavioral questions you may be asked. Of course, it's going to be different based on the industry that you're in. But overall, someone's always going to be asking you to give examples of your prior experience. So right now we're on the Muse's site, and what they have it broken down to separate sections. So for the first couple of questions, they talk about teamwork. So they have great sample questions that you could use when you're practicing to answer to make sure that you're able to answer questions about teamwork. They also talk about it's good to have examples of client-facing skills, ability to adapt, and this is huge. We live in an era now where there's so much knowledge out there, at least for the data science space. Maybe an algorithm that I was using in the past is no longer really relevant. There's a more one that takes up less resources, is faster, and it's really important to be up to speed on that stuff and being able to adapt to new technologies that happen. You can't just rely on Excel spreadsheets, unfortunately. You need to adapt to using dashboards and other types of tools, especially with AI being more prevalent in all fields. Time management skills. No one wants to hire someone who's going to be late, forgetting about projects, or not completing them on time. So you want to have examples of time management. Communication, being able to work again with peers and communicating effectively. And then basic stuff on motivation and values, which you don't have to focus too much on that. I think that rarely gets answered, and you can use your other examples. So a big misconception that I've seen is actually tapping back to the Muse is, say if we're going to practice with ourselves on answering communication skills questions. I've seen individuals try to tailor an example in their lives for each one of these questions. Now that's kind of insane. Can you imagine having to memorize 5 different scenarios? And in this case, there's 25 different questions, 25 different scenarios. That's way too much. So what you need to do is just focus on 4 to 5 stories, 5 being the max, of situations where something was just difficult, whether it was with a team, a client, or you just being behind in a certain field, and how you dealt with that. That's usually all you have to do. So what I want you to do is take this template and basically go in and write down your scenarios. So I'll just do a quick example. So I'm going to give an example of working with client facing. My situation is like we talked about for the server example, Saturday night, busy, overbooked clients for reservations. So I'm not making full sentences, which is the perfect way to do it. You want to be like very notes-based so you can refer to it quickly and not have to read an essay. So the task, calm down, client, action, spoke to client, shared understanding, gave menu, gave 5% off. Result, client happy, client came back, client remembers me. So now, as I'm going through these questions up here, I can tailor a lot of these responses based on that one example. So time management, let's just take 18. Sometimes it's just not possible to get everything on your to-do list done. Tell me about a time your responsibilities got a little overwhelming. What did you do? Now, even though this was a client-facing example that we just wrote out, you see how we could still tailor it? We could talk about our responsibilities to make sure people are seated on time, and that if they're waiting for a while, that they're not going to be in an upset mood, because of course that will upset the rest of the people waiting, and then that could in turn have bad reviews. So then that was an overwhelming situation, which we talked about, the Saturday night, very busy. And what did we do? We just described that here. What did we do? And let's look at another one, communication skills. So let's see. Give me an example of a time when you had to explain something fairly complex to a frustrated client. How did you handle this delicate situation? All right, so pretty complex is we have a system that is double booking reservations based on the location that you're at and the timing that you're putting. Based on the delay of whatever network that you're on, it could double book at the same time. Like, that's something that, you know, the client isn't really looking to understand that whole piece, but we could use that example of, you know, the overbooked clients. And it's a complex topic of how these clients get overbooked, but we could break it down by saying, you know, it was a complex situation, but we just let them know, hey, it was an overbooking, our end. We sincerely apologize. Don't worry, we're going to take care of you for the next couple hours as you're having reservations here. So instead of going into this complex explanation, you're just, you know, making it very high level so that doesn't further confuse or frustrate the client. And overall, the benefit here is we wrote down one single example, and now you could see that it can answer multiple behavioral interview questions. So your next steps are to write down, 3 to 5 scenarios and have them be about difficult situations like we spoke about, maybe some working with the team, you yourself, maybe you didn't understand something the first time, you were late. Make sure that each of these examples, it's something that you overcome at the end. You always want it to be a positive story at the end. So it's almost like a hill. You start at the top, you say this scenario, you say this incredibly difficult task that, you know, you didn't know how to accomplish in the moment, but based on your resources or previous knowledge, you were able to succeed. And there you have it. So if you haven't already, please subscribe to this channel and utilize this template. I will put it in the show notes. Thanks, everyone.